First story by Michael Thompson. I remember it like it was yesterday, although it's been years since that night. I've always been fascinated with abandoned places, their silent walls whispering untold stories. But nothing prepared me for the experience at the old asylum in upstate New York. It was the summer of 2018, and my curiosity had led me to this decrepit structure. The asylum, which had been abandoned since the late 70s, sat in a clearing surrounded by dense woods. It was a colossal, eerie building with broken windows like hollow eyes, watching over a landscape reclaimed by nature. As I entered, the air felt thick, heavy with the weight of forgotten memories. As I wandered through the corridors, my flashlight casting long shadows that seemed to dance on the peeling paint of the walls. The silence was oppressive, broken only by the sound of my footsteps and the occasional drip of water. In what used to be the patient's room, remnants of life still lingered. A rusty bed frame, tattered curtains fluttering in the breeze, faded drawings on the walls. It felt like walking through a time capsule, each room holding echoes of the past. As the evening crept in, an unsettling feeling settled over me. I could almost hear the whispers of the asylum's former inhabitants. Deciding to explore the basement before leaving, I descended the creaking steps. The basement was darker, the air cooler. I felt an inexplicable chill run down my spine. That's when I heard it, a soft, shuffling sound, like someone dragging their feet. My heart pounded in my chest, and every instinct screamed at me to run. But curiosity, that dangerous companion, urged me to investigate. I followed the sound, turning a corner, and that's when I saw him. A man, or what was left of one, stood in the shadows. His clothes were tattered, his eyes hollow pits in a gaunt face. He didn't speak, but stared at me, a look of unspeakable sadness in his eyes. Panic seized me, and I stumbled back, fleeing the basement and the building, not stopping until I reached my car. I don't know who that man was or what he wanted. Maybe he was a former patient, a lost soul trapped in time, or perhaps just a homeless person seeking refuge in the abandoned asylum. But his image haunts me to this day, a ghostly reminder of my encounter with the unknown. That one was very scary, but this one is much scarier. Prepare yourself for Elena's encounter in the Australian outback. Second story by Elena Rodriguez. I have always been drawn to the wild, untamed beauty of the Australian outback. It's a place where the skies stretch endlessly, and the land tells stories of an ancient past. But my camping trip in the summer of 2021 turned from an adventure into a spine-tingling tale that I will never forget. I set up camp near Uluru, a magnificent sandstone rock formation sacred to the indigenous Anangu people. The first few days were blissful, filled with hikes and stargazing. The vastness of the landscape was both awe-inspiring and intimidating. But then, things started to change. It began with small, easily dismissible occurrences. Items moved from where I had left them, unfamiliar tracks around my tent, and an eerie feeling of being watched. I chalked it up to the wildlife or maybe my own forgetfulness. However, as the days passed, the occurrences grew stranger. One night, I awoke to the sound of whispering outside my tent. Thinking it was another camper, I called out. The only response was the sudden, oppressive silence of the desert. I spent the rest of that night wide awake, every sound amplified in the stillness. The following day, I discovered old, faded paintings on a nearby rock, disturbing images that depicted scenes of anguish and fear. I felt a chill run down my spine as I studied them, an inexplicable sense of dread settling over me. That night, the whispering returned, louder, more insistent. I mustered the courage to look outside, but there was nothing but the vast, empty desert under the moonlit sky. Yet the sensation of being observed was stronger than ever. The climax of my ordeal came on my last night. Awoken by a chilling breeze, I found the flap of my tent open. Stepping out, I saw a figure standing at a distance, silhouetted against the moonlight. It was a person, or so it seemed, but their presence was unnerving. They stood completely still, facing me, and in the silence of the night, we remained locked in this eerie standoff. I don't remember how long I stood there, but eventually the figure turned and walked away, disappearing into the darkness. The next morning, I packed up and left, the relief of leaving mixed with a deep sense of unease. Back home, I researched and learned about the Outback's history, filled with stories of lost travelers and ancient spirits. Maybe I had encountered one of those lost souls, or perhaps it was just another person, as unsettled by our encounter as I was. Whatever it was, the experience had stayed with me, a haunting reminder of the mysteries that lie in the heart of the Australian outback. From the haunting vastness of the Australian outback, we now shift to the dense forests of the Pacific Northwest. David Clarke's story is one of suspense and survival. Third story by David Clarke. My name is David Clarke, and I've always considered myself an experienced hiker. The forests of the Pacific Northwest were my playground, a place where I felt at peace amidst the towering trees and serene trails. However, an incident in the fall of 2022 changed my perspective forever. It started as a typical weekend hike in the Cascade Mountains. The weather was perfect, with a crispness in the air that heralded the coming of autumn. My plan was a simple overnight trip: hike in, camp, hike out. I'd done it countless times. The first day was uneventful, filled with the familiar sounds of the forest and the beauty of the changing leaves. I set up camp as the sun dipped below the horizon, casting long shadows through the trees. That night, I was jolted awake by a sound that was out of place in the natural nocturnal chorus. The snap of a twig, as if someone or something was moving around my campsite. I called out, thinking maybe another hiker was nearby, but there was no response. Unease gripped me, but eventually I convinced myself it was just an animal and fell back asleep. The next day, I continued my hike, but I couldn't shake the feeling of being watched. Every rustle in the underbrush, every creak of a tree seemed amplified. I told myself I was being paranoid. After all, I was alone in the wilderness. As the day wore on, the feeling intensified. Then I noticed something chilling. Unfamiliar footprints overlapping my own on the trail. They were fresh, indicating that whoever made them was following me and not far behind. Panic set in. I increased my pace, but so did my pursuer. I didn't dare look back, my mind racing with possibilities. Was it a deranged individual, a hunter, or something else? As the sun began to set, I realized I couldn't make it back to my car before dark. I made a decision to leave the trail, hoping to lose whoever was tailing me. I found a hidden spot to spend the night, my heart pounding in my chest. That night was the longest of my life. Every sound was magnified in the darkness, and I was sure I heard footsteps circling my makeshift camp. Dawn couldn't come fast enough. At first light, I cautiously made my way back to the trail and hurried towards my car. I never saw who or what was following me, but the sense of relief when I finally drove away was overwhelming. I reported the incident to the park rangers, but they found nothing unusual. To this day, I have no explanation for what happened. Was it a person tracking me for some nefarious purpose, or something less tangible? The not knowing haunts me, and the forests I once loved now hold a sense of foreboding I can't shake. From the stalking shadows of the Pacific Northwest, we now descend into the depths of Paris's catacombs with Anna Petrova. Her story takes us into a world beneath the city streets, where history and horror intertwine. Fourth story by Anna Petrova. My name is Anna Petrova, and I've always been fascinated by the hidden corners of the world. This led me to the catacombs of Paris in the spring of 2023, a decision that plunged me into a night I will never forget. The Paris catacombs are famous, a vast underground ossuary holding the remains of millions. I entered through an official tour, but I had a plan to explore the lesser-known sections, the parts off-limits to tourists. The tour was eerie but fascinating, a path through narrow corridors lined with bones. It's a solemn place, a stark reminder of our mortality. But my curiosity wasn't satisfied with the sanitized version of the tour. I wanted to see more. So, when the opportunity presented itself, I slipped away from the group, heart pounding with excitement and a touch of fear. The corridors I ventured into were darker, the air mustier. I had a map, but the catacombs are a labyrinth, and it wasn't long before I realized I was lost. The deeper I went, the more the silence weighed on me. The only sound was my footsteps and the occasional drip of water. The walls here were not adorned with bones, but with faded graffiti, symbols whose meanings were lost to time. It felt like walking into the past, a place untouched for centuries. As I wandered, trying to find my way back, I started to feel like I wasn't alone. I heard whispers echoing through the tunnels, soft and indistinct. I told myself it was my imagination, the tricks of an overstimulated mind in a place as macabre as this. But then I saw something that chilled me to the bone. In a small chamber, illuminated by the beam of my flashlight, were fresh markings on the wall. They were symbols similar to the ancient graffiti, but these were new. Someone else was down here recently. Panic set in. I turned to leave, but that's when I heard it. A soft, shuffling sound behind me. I spun around, flashlight casting wild shadows, but there was nothing. My heart was racing, every instinct screaming at me to get out. I hurried through the corridors, the sense of being followed growing stronger. I could almost feel a presence behind me, just out of sight. I stumbled, disoriented, my mind a whirlwind of fear. Then, in a moment that seemed like a lifetime, I saw a light. Another tour group. Relief washed over me as I merged into the group unnoticed. I didn't look back, didn't want to know what might have been lurking in the shadows. I emerged into the daylight, feeling like I'd escaped from another world. I've since tried to rationalize it. Maybe it was just another urban explorer, or the catacombs playing tricks on me. But deep down, I can't shake the feeling that something was down there with me, something that wasn't just a shadow of the past. From the hidden depths beneath Paris, we now travel to an old factory in Birmingham, England, with John O'Connor. His exploration into the abandoned industrial site reveals more than just forgotten relics. Fifth story by John O'Connor. I am John O'Connor, and I've always been drawn to urban exploration. There's something about the decay of once thriving places that captivates me. This fascination led me to an old factory in Birmingham, England, in the winter of 2024, an experience that turned into a nightmarish ordeal. The factory had been abandoned since the early 2000s. It was a massive structure of rusting metal and broken windows, a ghost of the industrial age. I entered through a gap in the fence, the setting sun casting long shadows over the graffiti-covered walls. Inside, the factory was a maze of machinery and conveyor belts, all silent and still. My footsteps echoed in the vast, empty spaces. I wandered through the assembly lines and storage areas, imagining the bustle and noise that once filled these halls. As night fell, the factory took on a more sinister aspect. The fading light created an interplay of light and shadow, making the machines seem like slumbering beasts. I felt a growing sense of unease, a feeling that I wasn't alone. Then I stumbled upon a room that looked like an office. Papers and old photographs were strewn about, and on the wall was a large, faded blueprint of the factory. But what caught my attention was a series of photos pinned next to it. They were recent, showing areas of the factory I had just walked through, but in each photo, there was a figure standing in the shadows, barely discernible. I hadn't seen anyone, but there they were, a silent observer in each picture. A chill ran down my spine. I quickly left the room, mind racing with questions. Who was taking these photos? Why? As I hurried through the corridors, trying to find my way back, I heard a sound. Footsteps echoing in the vastness of the factory. They were deliberate, heavy, as if someone was following me. I quickened my pace, but the footsteps kept pace with me, always a constant distance away. I tried to rationalize it, perhaps another urban explorer, or a homeless person using the factory for shelter. But the feeling of being hunted was overwhelming. I felt like prey in a concrete jungle. Finally, I saw the exit. The night sky a welcome sign. I burst out of the factory, not stopping until I reached the safety of the street. I looked back once, half expecting to see a figure in the doorway, but there was nothing. I reported my experience to the local police, but they found nothing unusual. The factory was demolished shortly after, its secrets buried under new development. I still explore abandoned places, but the experience in that factory left its mark on me. I'm more cautious, always aware that some places hold more than just the echoes of the past. Sometimes they hold something else, something that watches and waits in the shadows. Check out this recommended video you see on screen. It's my personal favorite. These stories tonight have taken us through a journey of realistic horror, each unique and unsettling in its own way. Remember, the scariest stories are those that could be true. Thank you for joining me in this chilling exploration. Stay safe and keep exploring the mysteries of our world.